All right, well, welcome everybody. We are thrilled that you're able to join us today. Got over 100 people registered for this webinar, so some people are still enjoying their dinner and they're going to join us probably in about 2 minutes, but that's okay. We've got about 30 minutes worth of slides that we'll share with you today, but we've got a lot of time left for Q&A. That's usually the sort of most engaging part of the presentation. But we really just want to give everybody a heads up of the bills and the legislation that we think we're going to be working on, anticipate that we're going to be working on this session. And we're thrilled. We've got Peggy Sander with us, who, funny, we started the same day. So Peggy was our senior attorney and an assistant director in the state office for, I guess we're coming up on 12 years, Peggy. And but over the last, I guess, 2.5 years has been our executive director, and we're just thrilled to have her tonight. So Peggy, I'll let you take it away. Let me just add one thing that if you'd like to ask a question, I would encourage you to just put it in the Q&A. If it's something that is really relevant right that second, then we'll interrupt Peggy. And if not, we'll pick it up at the end of the session if that's okay with everybody. Okay, Peggy. Ready?
All right, Anne, thank you for those kind words. And I want to thank everyone for joining tonight to talk about what we see coming forward in the General Assembly session 2022. I will say it's really well timed, this webinar. Just in the last several days, I can feel my own sort of energy gearing up to try to address all of these challenges. So Anne, if you could move the slide. Give me the first picture here. I wanted to just remind you, we're talking about, of course, Chesapeake Bay Restoration. That's what we do. But that means we start from mountain streams. We continue the story and all of our efforts across the Commonwealth, across the Piedmont area, across the coastal plain until it reaches the tidal waters. It's truly a story that covers almost all of Virginia and certainly affects the lives of all of us in Virginia because, lest we ever forget it, the Chesapeake Bay is an economic engine for the entire Commonwealth. So for more than half a century, CBF has been working and I think in many cases has led the effort to restore the Bay. Bipartisan, or I should say presidents from both parties have specifically announced their protections, their work to restore the Bay by referring to it as a national treasure. And we think that it's important to keep that in mind. It is our treasure in Virginia, but it is as well a national treasure on which the health and well-being of nearly 20 million people directly rely. And that number gets expanded quite dramatically when we talk about the thousands of species, plants and animals that also depend on this waterway. We at the Bay Foundation work very hard to ensure that our work is grounded in science. We also recognize that nothing we do or that we work for in the Chesapeake Bay itself is possible unless we focus as well on our local waterways. We educate tens of thousands of people every year. We advocate for better public policy in our General Assembly, hopefully with our administration, and certainly with our local governments. We do this work hoping to ensure that policies are good, that our legislators and decision makers recognize they are accountable to us to live up to the constitutional mandate to protect our land and waters. And as part of all of our effort to keep ourselves honest, so to speak, we do hands-on restoration across the watershed. Many of you know that the Clean Water Blueprint is guiding our efforts now and has been for more than 10 years. It's the result of a federal-state partnership, which has involved the 6 Bay states, the federal government, both in the District of Columbia and in the Chesapeake Bay program, which is part of the Clean Water Act. This blueprint establishes goals and actions to ensure that all of the practices necessary to get to appropriate water quality in the Bay are in place by 2025, just around the corner. The blueprint specifically addresses challenges to reaching these goals. It provides programs and measures to achieve those goals. It has a mechanism embodied in it to do adaptive management so that we're not stuck with programs that don't work. No, we change them so that they do work to reach those goals. It's been a very successful program. Over the many years that we've been at this work, we have cut the pollution to the bay in half, which is frankly a remarkable prospect. And it's been made possible not just by the decision makers that we're going to be talking about tonight, but by people like you, like the rest of us, those of us who care about our waterways and our natural environment. I think you all know that no discussion about the restoring the health of the Chesapeake Bay it would be complete unless we acknowledge that climate change is changing the nature of our work and the kinds of challenges we're going to have to do to address. Polluted runoff, air pollution, all of these things remain formidable threats. We haven't mastered them yet. But the goal of the blueprint, Restored Bay, is just around the corner, and we think within sight. Our advocacy work, and by our, I mean, yes, those of us who are speaking tonight directly, but all of you who are listening, our work and our advocacy work in particular is essential to that goal. Next slide, Ann. So, yes, we have a new governor, or we will have a new governor in about a month. Governor-elect Youngkin has swept certainly the offices in the Patrick Henry building in Virginia. He has come in with what appears to be a determination to make some changes. We're not very sure what that means for our Bay restoration programs. We are hearing on good authority. Just today, a very important member of the Republican Senate members told me today that he is quite persuaded that the governor is committed to restoring the Bay and to doing so by 2025. So that's all good news. But it is certainly clear that we will look at Bay restoration programs through a different lens. And we are learning what that means. We have a lot to learn, but we're anxious to begin. And so we will be welcoming any insights you may hear about interests that the new governor and his administration have. So it is definitely a new day with all kinds of surprises, I'm sure, waiting for us. It is perhaps significant that his term is almost exactly the same time frame that we have left for meeting our blueprint goals. This is an opportunity for the new governor to achieve and leave for future generations a great legacy. We hope you will help us pass on that message to him. And could you change the slide? So, of course, the session starts. It starts on Wednesday of the second week in January. And we also have a new set of legislators. The Senate, you will remember, did not change. So we will be going back to a Senate in which there is a small Democratic majority. We know those senators, many of them quite well. And among them, we find many people who've been working for a long time on Bay restoration. The House has changed leadership. It is now a Republican-led House of Representatives. Certainly we are aware that priorities in new House members will be different from the priorities in the prior General Assembly. So lots of education will be occurring between, frankly, now and the beginning of the session and throughout the session. I do emphasize what we have always emphasized and what has been a constant in Virginia's work for its environment, and that is the Bay is a bipartisan priority. It always has been. It has been, even though some new decision makers, when they come in, don't recognize that it is. But we will hope to have the help of all of you in ensuring that message in particular is conveyed. So let's go to the next slide and see what our first set of challenges and opportunities will be. It's the budget. Why the budget? The budget, of course, is what will fund the actions that we hope our Commonwealth will take. And making it pass is the task of our General Assembly members. It starts off every year in December with an introduced proposed budget prepared by the governor who was in his office at that time, even if, like Governor Ralph Northam, it is his last month in office. Governor Northam and his people are right now putting the finishing touches, we understand, on his introduced budget. It will be presented formally to the public December 16th. So we will then have a very long and detailed document that will outline what Governor Northam thinks should be the path, the financial underpinnings of the path to cover the next 2 years. That will, it is highly unlikely that that introduced budget will be passed in its introduced form, because what happens thereafter is that legislators take a look at it, they decide, I think something else is more important than what the governor has proposed, so I'm going to put in a budget amendment. So many of us will be working with our legislative champions, our hope force patrons, and asking them to put in potentially changes to what Governor Northam has done, or more likely, we will be asking them to support what the governor has done. In other words, this is an opportunity for us to get our priorities to our legislators and help them to understand why they are important. Once the budget amendments have been presented, they will be focused on and investigated by, in particular, 2 committees in the General Assembly, the Senate Finance Committee and the House Appropriations Committee. Those members will take some of their discussions and their deliberations publicly, but near the end of the process, that is to say, near the end of the near the end of the first half of the session, these committees will go into a state of deep silence and prepare ultimately what is put before both houses of the General Assembly. They will be asked to approve it. Assuming they do so, it will then go to the governor. The governor will have one final opportunity to make amendments to that approved budget. He will send it back to the General Assembly. They must pass it at that point. Or they must vote on the final proposal. So it's a very long process. Part of it's public and part of it is fairly non-transparent, but it's a really key part of the process. So Anne, next slide, please.
Peggy, one second.
Sure.
Sorry, there we go. Locked up for a second.
So this slide lays out the top financial priorities for the General Assembly from Chesapeake Bay Foundation this year. And I'll just go quickly through them so that you can see what the total dollar amounts are and make a couple of comments about that. And then I'll go a little bit more into each of the separate programs so that you get a better picture on what it is we're talking about. So the first item is our agricultural cost share program supporting farmers who do conservation practices. We're looking for $313 million. I will just tell you this is a huge number. It is a number that is, in our view, highly possible because we had a very large surplus at the end of last year, and a big chunk of that surplus is dedicated to, or can be dedicated to this work. So agricultural cost share, $313 million, our first priority. Second priority, the Stormwater Local Assistance Fund. We're asking for, over a 2-year period, $160 million. Wastewater treatment plant upgrades, $50 million per year, or a total of $100 million for the biennium. Combined sewer overflows, that is to say, upgrading those combined sewer systems in Alexandria and Richmond, $140 million. and then the Department of Forestry for certain tree programs, $6.4 million. This is a very large set of budget requests from the Chesapeake Bay Foundation. Let's look at them a little bit more individually. So you could take me to the next slide, Ann. This is obviously a picture of some important agricultural lands, probably in the Piedmont area of Virginia. And what it does is focuses on a key conservation practice, putting in riparian forested buffers, that is that strip of vegetation and trees along this stream. This is important because it helps to ensure that nutrients and excess fertilizers stay on the soil and not in our waterways. It's a very important practice because it has high effectiveness, also because it lasts a long time. You put in a forested buffer, and with some relatively minor maintenance over the next many years, it will produce its benefits protecting water qualities for 15 plus years. Virginia's main source of pollution to the bay is not surprising in the sense that it is agriculture, the largest industry in Virginia that covers the largest land area. It also is an industry peopled by farmers who are committed not only to growing our food, supporting their families, but also to water quality practices. So it's very important that our General Assembly support their work and to do so by adequately funding the cost share program. As I mentioned, $313 million spread over 2 years. It's a very large sum, but it is the amount of money approximately that is needed to actually fill the needs across the state, both in the Chesapeake Bay watershed and in the rest of the state. So we are joining with our partners, both on the conservation side and with our partners who work more directly with farmers. For example, it is my understanding that the Farm Bureau and the Agribusiness Council are also asking the General Assembly for this extent of dollars to support those programs. So really important program, $313 million over 2 years. And next slide. Stormwater Local Assistance Fund. I think all of you who live in developed areas, certainly in our urban areas and many of our suburban areas, are aware that flooding is a big deal. It's getting worse. We have more frequent storms, more intense storms, and frankly, our sewer systems, our stormwater systems, are not adequate and modernized in ways that are necessary to ensure that that dirty water of the sort that you see pictured here doesn't just run off these impervious surfaces, getting faster, getting dirtier, getting warmer, but rather is infiltrated into the ground to be cleaned up. Look at some of these projects to take care of this program, to take care of these issues can be quite expensive for our localities. And so we are asking the General Assembly to provide substantial resources to the Stormwater Local Assistance Fund, $160 million over a 2-year period. And that funding will be used to provide cost share, typically 50%, but in resource poor communities, an additional amount of state dollars to join with some local dollars to fix these problems. So again, stormwater is a problem that has been very tenacious. We have not made much of any progress over the course of the last many years. Some areas we have improvements, other areas we have declines. So we really need to get behind this program. We really need to support the work that our localities are doing. And that's why we're asking for $160 million for the program. So next slide, Ann. The big success, the unquestioned success in Virginia's work to restore our waterways has been upgrading its wastewater treatment plants across the Commonwealth. We see some of the most significant improvements along the Potomac River because Virginia began its work along that watershed. The reason was quite logical. The Potomac River opens onto the bay at the midpoint of the bay, which has been some of the areas where the bay, due to pollution, has been most oxygen starved. In other words, where plants and animals can't really survive. So we started our work there. Last year, the General Assembly required in new legislation approximately 30 additional facilities to upgrade. And we want to make sure that state cost share dollars go to those facilities as they upgrade. We're asking for $100 million over the biennium, probably in bond funds, to help make it affordable over a long period of time. Really important work. These upgrades provide long-term, measurable, and reliable pollution reductions. Next slide, Ann. Thank you. So this slide was a photograph taken last summer when Mayor LeVar Stoney in Richmond convened a group of people to talk about a very intractable problem in the city of Richmond, a problem shared by Alexandria and Lynchburg, and that is they have all inherited what we'll call politely an old-fashioned stormwater system. That's a combined sewer overflow system. That means in times of rain, stormwater and raw sewage, those pipes are joined and they can go directly, they can empty directly into the receiving waterways without getting treatment. So obviously, very unpleasant results that are harmful to our waterways in terms of adding nutrients and other pollution, but also harmful to humans who want to use those waterways because of the bacteria that's in this raw sewage. Alexandria and Richmond are under state mandated deadlines to fix these problems. Alexandria started a little bit earlier, and it has, while an expensive and serious set of issues to contend with, it's made some dramatic headway. Many of you might have seen the massive tunnel building process that's going on there. The tunnel will, in effect, store this untreated sewage until precipitation levels decline. It will then reroute that stored effluent, treat it in the wastewater treatment plant before discharging it into the Potomac River. So that's a great work. They need $40 million to continue that work in a timely way. Richmond's a much more serious problem, much larger. They have more than 20 outfalls that need to be upgraded. That's in comparison to 4 in Alexandria. Richmond also has a population which is not capable in a reasonable way to sustain the full cost of the work that needs to be done. They have estimated that the cost of completing this work by 2035 is over $1 billion. So we think it's important that the General Assembly continue to support the work, the very thoughtful work that Richmond is doing to address this problem. We're asking the General Assembly to contribute $100 million to Richmond in the next 2 years. Lynchburg has just about finished its work on its smaller system. So lots of work needs to be done on this combined sewer overflow systems, and we hope you'll support that work as we do our General Assembly members. Next slide, Ian. Tree canopy. I don't think there is anyone watching this webinar who is not aware of how important trees are to virtually all of the environmental assets that we have based on their enormous and very important ecosystem services. You know, trees take up carbon dioxide and release oxygen. You know that trees shade our cities to both make them better places to live, but also to cool them off in the summertime so that they are healthier. You know that trees help to stabilize stream banks. They help to mitigate localized flooding. They take up nutrients. The services that trees provide are irreplaceable in any fashion that we are aware of. And yet they are under stress. They are under stress by disease. They are under stress from development, particularly in our urbanizing areas. Localities in Virginia, particularly in the north, have had the benefit of some statutes that allow localities certain opportunities to require developers to replant or conserve trees. The number of problems that we've seen with those opportunities, they're limited in geographic area. One applies only to the Bay watershed, one applies only to Northern Virginia. They also limit the extent to which localities can direct developers to preserve or replant trees. So we think it's important that those authorities be expanded. We think it's important that they reach statewide. And we think it's important that they have flexibility in them so that localities can address their own local conditions. Last year, we put in some legislation. I should say we did not put it in. We were very fortunate in having the support of Senator Marsden and Nancy Guy putting in legislation. That legislation was provisionally passed last year, but was subject to a requirement of an additional stakeholder process and resubmission this year. That stakeholder process has been largely completed, and a number of us have been working pretty hard to address and reach compromise on some final very important issues. But we are still hopeful we will have something that will help the situation in a material way across Virginia. So stand by for final news on that, but certainly reach out to Senator Marsden, who will resubmit the bill in the Senate. And we expect that we will also have House patron. We've got 2 or 3 people that have committed to doing so if we need them. So stand by on this, but we need your help on getting this tree bill across the finish line. And could you, there we go. Back to our budget priorities, we're also asking for a very small amount of money to enable the Virginia Marine Resources Commission to do an assessment, a scientific assessment of the location and extent of Virginia's oyster populations. I think you're all aware the oyster restoration in Virginia is moving forward at a really terrific pace. We have just announced, Virginia have just announced the full restoration for oysters of the Piankatank River and the Great Wicomico. And this is in addition to earlier similar successes in the Lafayette River and the eastern branch of the Elizabeth River. We're moving quickly to restore these stocks. A stock assessment will help us get there. So another priority. Next slide, Ann. We have learned a lot about the importance of bivalves, oysters, in filtering water in our tidal areas. But we in Virginia are also learning that oysters are not the only bivalve of great importance. Our freshwater mussels are a huge asset. Virginia has a very high concentration of mussel species, one of the highest in the world. They are also under great stress. We have many different species which are endangered, and yet they are critical to our freshwater environment. And so we are asking the General Assembly to establish, to direct the Department of Wildlife Resources and to fund positions to ensure we have the development of a mussel restoration plan across Virginia. So this is a new area that many of us across the state are looking at, but we think it will be important both for water quality and for protecting a very important set of species in Virginia. Next slide. I talked a little bit already about the nature of the tree canopy legislation, but I also realized I didn't tell you about the actual money that we're seeking, $6.4 million. This would go to fund several programs that would be helpful in achieving our tree canopy goals. One is to support the a tree giveaway program in the state. Another is to support the ability of the Department of Forestry to provide assistance, guidance, and technical assistance to localities as they work to restore and enhance their tree canopies. And finally, we're hopeful that the Department of Forestry will gain enough money to help put its new Kent nursery on a better financial footing. If we're going to restore trees, if we're going to have an adequate tree canopy enhancement program, we need to have the tree stocks that committed citizens like those you see in this slide can use and plant in their local communities. Next slide, Ann. So just to take a little bit of a different tack here, we're also supporting legislation that would prohibit the use of coal tar sealant for driveways across the Commonwealth. Why is that? Well, the main reason for that is that coal tar sealants contain high levels of polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, which are more affectionately and easily known as PAHs. These are harmful to wildlife, and they are considered to be a carcinogen for humans. Coal tar sealants contain over 1,000 times more PAHs than similar asphalt-based products. And the Chesapeake Bay program, which is the federal division which focuses on Chesapeake Bay restoration, it has prioritized elimination of PAHs, considering it to be the second most important toxic contaminant for the bay. So we are hopeful that we will be able to secure the support of legislators in banning the use of this product across the state. Next slide, Ann. Many of you have been following closely the work that Virginia has been doing under the current administration in particular, and with the help of our legislators, to become resilient to climate change related impacts. Many of these impacts, of course, are being felt in our Commonwealth, most notably, famously in Hampton Roads area, Norfolk, but frankly, across the Commonwealth, where we are seeing, as we mentioned earlier, more frequent and more intense storms leading to sometimes devastating floods. One of the steps that we are supporting is the establishment of what we're calling a resilience board, perhaps similar to an existing Commonwealth Transportation Board. It would be tasked with, among other things, taking into account applications for grants and loans from a fund established in the last several sessions, the Community Flood Preparedness Fund. So it's important to have that fund be, the monies in that fund to be distributed according to clear and appropriate criteria. Department of Conservation and Recreation has been working on a grant manual. We think that therefore DCR should be staffed to a resilience board. They should work closely together, working with, of course, also a scientific advisory committee, a standing committee that would make sure that the criteria for evaluating grant applications, loan applications are scientifically sound. We think it's really important to ensure that the fund criteria and the implementation of the flood fund guidelines should be made statewide. We are very concerned about flooding in our coastal regions, but it would be unwise and frankly unfair if all of the money were to go to the coastal regions without consideration of the floods in upland areas as well. So statewide application is really important. We also, I would note as well, you all may have seen that Governor Northam issued his coastal master plan in the recent week. We think that's a very important step in addressing some of these resilience issues. We recommend and hope legislators adopt key parts of that master plan into state code. This is important to ensure continuity over time and statewide, if you will, buy-in. So, and next slide. In the last session, 2020 and 2021, the General Assembly changed some existing laws that particularly affect our coastal regions, sensitive areas in the coast. I'm thinking of the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Act, where the General Assembly charged DEQ and frankly, the local Chesapeake Bay Preservation Act authorities, whether boards or their zoning boards, to take into account climate change and to take into account trees for their water quality and flood related benefits as they evaluate applications for projects in Chesapeake Bay Preservation Act areas. As directed, regulations were completed in the last year to help implement those legislative changes. On the Marine Resource Commission side, the General Assembly made it clear that for shoreline protection, green solutions, and in particular living shorelines, are required in all cases where they are scientifically feasible. And following on that legislative change, MRC, in a painstaking process, developed guidelines to implement that legislative change. So these are two areas where we've made both legislative progress and we've had regulatory developments to implement those changes. We're now looking at defending those changes in the context of a new legislature. So we would ask you, as we are asking ourselves, we would ask you to urge legislators to ensure no harm is done, no rollbacks are undertaken of these very important developments that protect our sensitive coastal lands. Next slide, Ann. So just want to talk a little bit now about how we all can be most effective in working with legislators. So first of all, it's important to know where the decisions are made. We all know that a bill is passed when it achieves a majority in both houses and is signed by the governor. But a lot of work in the General Assembly occurs before we get to that point. And on the House side, most bills will first be sent to, or first be heard in a subcommittee. And if they are reported out of the subcommittee successfully, they will then go to the committee, where they also have to be reported out. All of that happens before the bill goes to the full House floor. The process is similar in the Senate, although there usually is no subcommittee, but rather bills would be heard first in committee before they go to the full Senate. And so it's important to get to legislators with suggestions, recommendations, comments before the matter gets to subcommittee. Public testimony will be heard in subcommittee on the House side, occasionally in committee on the House side, and on the Senate side, public testimony can be heard in committee. Public testimony is not heard when the bills go to the floor. So it's important to keep that chronology in mind And we'll show you in a minute where you can find out some of those schedules. Next slide, Ann. So what are the committees? Well, there are lots of committees in both houses. We tend to find that most of the bills that we're interested in are heard in 3 committees in each house. That's not a universal rule. Occasionally something is heard in 4th committee, but the most important ones for us on the House side are the House Agriculture, Chesapeake, and Natural Resources side. We call that House Ag in shorthand. The bills, for example, related to resiliency will most often be heard in that committee. Of course, House Appropriations is key. As we started off this discussion tonight, we're talking about money matters. They will be heard in House Appropriations Committee. And our tree bills and other bills that relate to counties, cities, and towns will be heard in the committee of that name. On the Senate side, very similar. We have the Agriculture, Conservation, and Natural Resources Committee. We call that Senate Ag. The Senate Finance Committee hears the budget bills, and the Local Government Committee will hear bills, including tree-related bills that have to do with local government authorities. So those are the key committees for most of our work. Next slide, Ann. Actually, if you don't mind, Ann, could you go back for 1 minute? I want to identify a few key members that people may want to keep in mind. House Ag, we know that it will now have a new committee chair this year. The committee chair will be Danny Marshall, who is from the Danville area. House Appropriations also will have a new chair. The chair will be Barry Knight, who is a delegate from South Virginia Beach. And counties, cities, and towns, we have not yet heard who will chair that committee, but we'll certainly let you know when we do hear. On the Senate side, the committee chairs will remain the same as they have been for the last several years. For Senate Ag, it is Chap Peterson, Senator from Fairfax. For Finance, it is Janet Howell, also from Fairfax. And Local Government, it is Linwood Lewis from the Eastern Shore and Norfolk. So now, and next slide. So you know now where the decisions are made and where your voices can be heard in testimony, but just want to talk to you about actually reaching out to your legislators before the session and during the session. This legislator, obviously, to many of you, is Senator Linwood Lewis from the Eastern Shore and the Norfolk area. It's really important to know that the General Assembly processes move really quickly. We're in a so-called long session this year, meaning that we have a 60-day legislative process that could be extended, but efforts are made to ensure that it's not extended. And over the course of that 60-day period, more than 3,000 or 4,000 bills will be heard. So that means, yeah, they don't get much sleep. And they certainly don't have much time to talk to people, even though they really do want to talk to their constituents. So it's really good right now, right this minute, throughout the month of December and up to the first week in January, for you to reach out to your legislator, your House member, and your senator. They have time to listen to you now, and they will be able to respond to your questions in a much more meaningful way than you might be able to do during session. So suggest that you do that. So next slide, Ann. How can you do this? Well, as you see here, you can meet together with other people in the floors, in the actual Capitol. That's what you see here. But if you want to do it before you walk the halls of the Capitol, you can reach out with an email. You can reach out with a telephone call. You can set up a Zoom appointment. All of those are ways to communicate with your legislator. If you are feeling a little bit shy about that, here's the thing to remember. They would much rather hear from their constituents than most of the rest of us. After all, they need your vote. Next slide, Ann. Here are some suggestions on what to do beyond letting your legislator know that you are a constituent. Many people, and the CBF often does this, will suggest, here's a postcard, send to your legislator. It's a way to do it that is time honored. You can, it doesn't take much time to send a form letter or a postcard. Every member has a legislative staff. Their staff members will read it, will collate it, will probably put them in a pile and say to the member, Senator, we have 37 postcards that ask you to do X. So that has some value. But it's actually much more effective if you send something that you write yourself. Do it, I would recommend in an email, although letters are possible. But a personalized email to the senator or to your delegate in which you say, I am X, I am a resident of your district, here's my address, this is what I think you should do, this is why I think you should do it. And if you feel inclined, you can also leave your contact information in case the legislator or his or her aide can get back to you. The best of all things, however, is to ask for a meeting, either on Zoom, outside, ask what might work for that legislator. Sometimes legislators would just as soon have a cup of coffee with a constituent as anything else. Don't hesitate to ask for that. And certainly don't hesitate to ask for that if you're doing it before session. Next slide in. So this slide summarizes some of the things that we have said before. Focus your efforts on the legislators, in your district, certainly on legislators that are making the initial decisions in subcommittee or committee. We try to give you a heads up on the schedule in which certain matters will be heard through our action network. So you'll receive an alert which might say the tree bill is going to be heard in counties, cities, and towns tomorrow at 3:30 p.m. Hopefully we'll have a little more advance notice than that, but sign up for that action alert if you're interested in receiving a notification. Keep in mind always the fact that there are 3,000, 4,000, very large number of bills for legislators to try to process. So you have to be succinct and you have to be clear. Enough detail so that the legislator knows who you are and that you've got a basis for knowing what you're saying, but don't provide unneeded information. And don't assume that the legislator knows the background to what you're talking about. In the old days, I might suggest that you walk into your legislator's office or a number of the places in the General Assembly building to look at the number of code books that make up the laws of Virginia, because there's a lot of them. They don't know the law except in their particular areas. So you will need to give the background to the legislator so that he or she can understand what you're asking for and why it's important. Always remember, you need to be candid with your legislator. You talk about what you want and why it's important. If you are aware that there is another person, or more likely another group, that opposes your legislation, you might want to make sure that the legislator knows that. That will give you an opportunity to explain your perspective on why your view is the more persuasive and compelling perspective. So that if you are aware of who else supports your position, of course, that bolsters the weight of your own position. So don't hesitate to offer that as well. Next slide. Legislators read the newspaper. I mean, it's an interesting thing. We're in an era where local papers are getting smaller all the time, but they read the newspapers. And if they don't have a chance to read their letters today, their legislative aide will call the newspapers around the state to make sure that the member knows what constituents are saying in the newspaper. So be alert to possibilities, to writing your legislator indirectly, basically putting a letter to the editor together, sending it to a newspaper, signing your name, and understand that by doing that, you're not only alerting the legislator of your perspective, but you're also alerting the entire readership of that newspaper. So that's really important. Do not hesitate to take advantage of that opportunity. Many of our volunteers, our clean water captains and others have taken advantage of this opportunity, and we think it provides a really good way to spread a message to legislators across a wide spectrum. Next slide, Ann. So this is a picture, a screenshot of a really important resource for everyone who wants to be involved in work at the General Assembly. It is put up by the Virginia Legislative Information Services, which is a function of the General Assembly. And it provides information that you can use to track bills. You can see in the bottom right where it says 2020s. This is an old one. You can change the year. 2020 special session tracking. You can ask for specific bills. If you look in the left-hand tabs, there are tabs to take you to the members, senators, delegates. You can find out background about them. There's a tab that will take you to the daily calendar, so you know what meetings are being held and what time they are scheduled for. So it's a wealth of information. If you're interested, I suggest you spend some time negotiating that website before the session so that you can use it easily. One thing that I particularly want to bring to your attention, and that is finding out who your legislator is. It is a thing in our political culture that we spend a lot of time talking about what happens at the national level, and a lot of people, some of the most well-informed and best people we know, are not aware of who their state senator and their state delegates are. You can find out who those individuals are at that website. And you can also watch committee meetings and voting that takes place at them live now at the link that is provided here. That's a very new development, and it really helps to make a lot of this work much more transparent, especially in an era of COVID. So I think that's the last slide. I think I might have raced through a lot of things, but I would really appreciate the opportunity to answer any questions I can, or to refer you to other sources if I can't. So thanks again for listening to that overview, and frankly, and most important, thanks for your interest in this work.
Thank you, Peggy, really appreciate that. So Peggy's provided you with a great overview of what we anticipate we're going to work on this year. And I just wanted to give a shout out. We've got a lot of clean water captains on the call, so thanks for joining us. I want to give just a 1-second commercial about that program, and just say that they are uber advocates, if you will, right? They enjoy policy, they enjoy meeting people, and they understand that a one-to-one relationship between them and their elected leaders, either at the local or state level, is just paramount to getting clean water initiatives passed through the General Assembly as well as approved at the local level. So you know, if you're interested in joining this cadre of amazing people, they come from all walks of life, and I can't brag enough about them. I then drop either Gabby or myself a line and let us know that you're interested in the Clean Water Captains Program, because you know, we welcome informed citizens and people who like to get engaged. So that's my commercial, Peggy. So I'll start with Michael Rubin had a question. Do the outgoing and incoming administrations consult on the budget at all?
What I know is that they consult about programs, and we have heard a number of instances where the incoming Governor-elect Youngkin, has met with Governor Northam. The chiefs of staffs have communicated, the outgoing cabinet people have been in meetings with, the program directors have been in meetings with the transition team. The object obviously is to provide some ongoing basis for the program continuation. So that we know is happening. I can't say that I know specifically that they consult over the budget. What I do know on the budget point is that each governor that we've worked with develops his introduced budget in a very confidential way. Many of us have had the opportunity to work with, for example, this Governor Northam and his administration on lots of issues. I'm telling you, they are sealed mouth. They do not talk about what's in the governor's introduced budget until he presents it. One departure from that in recent years is that Northam has, and you have seen this year, issued sort of previews. So today there was a preview of some very nice proposals made by Governor Northam, and which will be included in his introduced budget related to land conservation. We're hoping for the Bay Foundation for a similar preview related to water quality programs, but I can't even promise we're going to get that. So my conviction is that the incoming administration has had no input in the development of that budget, and we'll be studying it as closely as we all are between December 16th and the beginning of the session, so that they can do what they wish with it, so to speak.
All right, so if you've got questions, I'd see one from Susan. I'll answer that in just a second, but if you've got questions, just encourage you to type them into the Q&A. So it looks like Susan's question is, how does one get more involved? But I'm not sure what the NP is. Is that a question mark? So Susan, if you want, I could take you off of. Let me let you ask your question. Okay, so Susan. There you go. So you can ask your question.
Hey there. I was wondering how you get more involved in the tree nursery program that you discussed about having trees available for people to plant riparian buffers.
Oh, great question. Great question. So the work that we are asking the General Assembly to support is work that will be done by the Department of Forestry. We are asking, among other things, that new staff be hired, so that needs to be funded. But we are specifically asking, as you heard, that additional money be specifically appropriated to help support the development and the basically getting a tree nursery up and running. So those are financial asks that we're making as part of our legislative priority. But if you're interested in tree canopy work in general, I'm going to suggest that you reach out to your locality to see where volunteers can be incorporated. I'm guessing that either now or later, some suggestions for your particular locality might be forthcoming from my colleague Ann Jersey. So Ann, if you want to mention anything now, or perhaps you could take that offline later on to connect Susan to her locality in a way that would be really helpful. Great question.
Yeah, happy to do that. Just, you know, to amplify what Peggy was saying, there's the Assistant Director of Forestry gave a presentation a few weeks ago where he said that Virginia needs 40 million trees in order to implement the state's watershed implementation plan. And currently we're growing 22 million by 2025, right? The deadline for the blueprint. So we're going to be 18 million shy. And that's the reason why those, you know, those local nurseries are so important, but also why we're asking for the funding for the New Kent nursery, which is one of the asks as part of that 6.4 million that Peggy spoke about. Other questions? All right, hearing none, I'm happy to close this at 7:30. I'll just,
And let me just say that
Okay.
I saw another question maybe in the chat.
okay. Oh, there we go. Can you please provide where I can locate more information regarding smart protections for sensitive coastal lands? And what can I do to help ensure legislators not roll back new laws? And which new legislation do you consider the most important? Sharon, that's an excellent question. Peggy, I'll let you take that one.
Yeah, it's a really important question. So there are a number of pieces of legislation that are at the top of our priority list. One of those is the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Act. That's an act that basically gives localities in the coastal area east of 95 the obligation to make sure that land use follows certain rules to protect water quality. And the amendment that we're concerned about is an amendment related to ensuring that climate change is addressed in those decisions. And so we want to make sure that the General Assembly does not roll back either that amendment or change anything that was done by the agency in regulation. So I would say the key message is protect the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Act. A second statute related to that goal is the Tidal Wetlands Law. Changes were made to that to ensure that localities, when they address sea level rise and related climate change programs, do so in a manner that is green, is resilient, allows the protection of our tidal marshes, and is not and that hardening shoreline areas through various kinds of armoring techniques should be a last priority. That's a really important area. And so we would also just suggest that the key ask is ensure that our tidal wetlands law remains strong and incorporates resiliency measures. So those are two key areas that we are a little concerned might be under attack. And so we would recommend that you ask your legislator to protect them and prevent any rollbacks there. I hope that answered your question, but if not, let us know.
Peggy, we've got another question, which I think we can both answer, but does CBF coordinate its efforts with other organizations, such as those in the tourism industry? But you may want to speak about our coordination with Virginia Conservation Network too.
Yeah, I would say that one of the most powerful tools that all of us have in sort of our civic engagement work is our ability to, and our practice of partnering with other organizations and individuals. Anne mentioned the Virginia Conservation Network, which is an umbrella
There we go.
network. Sorry?
Can you start over? You just froze up.
Oh, sorry.
Okay, sorry.
Very important to engage in, and we do work in close coordination with partners. For example, the Virginia Conservation Network, which is an umbrella organization of over 100 organizations protecting local water bodies and other environmental resources across the Commonwealth. So that's a very key partner, or I should say set of partners. But we don't stop in our partnership work with conservation organizations. We partner with the Virginia Association of Counties, the Virginia Municipal League. We are working with, negotiating with, hoping to collaborate with developers where that's possible. Where we can make common cause with, frankly, almost anyone, we do that, making sure that our priorities are protected to the extent we can. So if you have a particular organization that you're interested in and you want to make sure we are working together, we're happy to answer that question. If you're looking for an organization in your local region that partners with us or also works on these issues that we can help you connect with, please let us know. And anything else you wanted to add to that question?
No, I think you got it. The James River Association is a wonderful partner, right? As well as, Friends of the Rappahannock, the Potomac River Keepers. I'll just say all of us, all the water organizations, we're on a water work group, and collectively we look at pretty much every single piece of legislation that touches water in any form or fashion, and decide collectively, I'll say, whether or not we can put our efforts to oppose it or support it, and then move out almost as an army, if you will. So, yeah. So Peggy, I don't see any others either in the chat or in the Q&A. So if nobody else has another question, I'll just thank everybody for attending. Remind you to sign up, pretty please, for our action alerts. We do not spam you. I would say that even when it's hot and heavy during the General Assembly, you're not going to get more than maybe 3 to 4 over the course of the 60 days, right? So it's not like you're going to get a gazillion emails from me or from Peggy asking you to take action. And we only send those out to the people who are in the districts of the delegates and senators who are making the decision, right? So, it's rare that we send out one to all Virginians. That's it for me. So I'll just say thank you so much. We appreciate everybody's attention tonight. We did record it, so you can go back and watch it again. I'll send out the link to the recording in a couple of days after I post it up on our website. So thank you, Peggy. And
I wanted to mention one more thing before we go.
Okay.
And that is many things obviously have changed in the era of COVID. One of those is the way the General Assembly conducts business, and indeed the location where some of that business is conducted. Keep alert to ongoing changes. For example, that it is highly likely, from what I understand, looking on the website, that the Senate will be meeting, at least in committee, and perhaps more than that, at the Science Museum of Virginia rather than the Capitol. So I just want to make sure you build that planning into any effort that you want to make to visit with legislators or to watch in person any of their sessions. That's the last word. Thank you.
All right. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
All right, take care. Bye-bye.